My name is John Martin, for those of you who haven't met yet. I am a scholarly communication librarian here at UNT Libraries, at the Willis Library. I'm very honored today to be introducing our second featured speaker, Dr. Safiya Umoja Noble. I've only recently been introduced to Dr. Noble's work, but I've been hearing about her from colleagues and friends in the library profession for quite some time now, and so I was very excited to be able to invite her to this event and to have her speak to us. Her work brings a critical information perspective to the study of public data and public information that raises important questions about the social, political, and ethical implications of data usage, particularly as it impacts marginalized communities. As much as we're all excited here about the possibilities and the opportunities of open data and open access, it's also important for us to ask these kinds of questions about the risks, the dangers, and the consequences of having this information available to us. So I'm excited to hear what Dr. Noble has to say about all of this. Dr. Safiya Umoja Noble is an assistant professor in the Department of Information Studies in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA. She also holds appointments in the Departments of African American Studies, Gender Studies, and Education. Her research on the design and use of applications on the internet is at the intersections of race, gender, culture, and technology. She's currently working on a monograph on racist and sexist algorithmic bias in search engines like Google. And she currently serves as an associate editor for the Journal of Critical Library and Information Studies and is the co-editor of two books, The Intersectional Internet, Race, Sex, Culture, and Class Online, and Emotions, Technology, and Design. Dr. Noble holds a PhD and an MS in Library and Information Science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a BA in Sociology from California State University, Fresno, with an emphasis on African American and ethnic studies. Her talk today is titled Toward an Ethic of Social Justice in the World of Online Information. So please welcome Dr. Safiya Noble.
Thank you. Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate that. Do I need this too?
Yeah.
Can you hold this
Well, maybe not. You just need
just one.
There we go.
You don't want double of what I have to say tonight. I'll tell you that. Thank you so much, John and Kevin. I didn't mean to make like the dramatic entrance up the aisle. Kevin had started and I was running in and I was like, I can't come up. It's fine. All right, so that's what happened. I'm very pleased to be here with you today, and I'm going to share with you some of the research that I've been doing for the past few years. And hi, over there, it's far. I hadn't anticipated that, so I'm going to try to look at you too while I'm going through some of this information. This is also a talk that's better followed by cocktails, and you're going to see what I mean by that. So I didn't hear that there was a cocktail break sponsored later today, but I'm going to guarantee you're going to need it because it's still a little early in the day to talk about oppression. For me, I need it followed by some red wine. Okay, so today I want to talk a little bit about things we can learn from digital information failures. And so it's going to be bad news from the front lines of the world of digital information. But some of these cases that I want to walk you through I'm going to explore both hardware, what I see and have written about as hardware failures, as well as software and kind of platform failures, as a way to give us an opening to think about things that maybe we haven't spent enough time thinking about. And I think that can also serve as kind of a point of intervention for us in the future. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick on Google a lot. And so for some people, that's a painful experience. For others, not so much. I feel like this crowd is pretty cool on Google. But I know that many times the younger the audience is, often the more painful it is. It's like I'm talking about their mama or something. I don't understand it. I'm like, it's not your family. Okay, so let's start with the first failure. And this is the failure of Google Glass, all right? In April of 2014, the research firm Toluna reported that 72% of the public hated Google Glass. Google Glass is a wearable personal information assistant technology. And people really hated it due to the privacy concerns that they had about Google Glass's capacity for surveillance. Multiple reports of Google Glass wearers being attacked for wearing the technology in public have made headlines across the United States since Google launched this exploratory beta in 2013. Now, Google Glass is a head-mounted, wearable optical design technology that promised users to, quote, take pictures, record what you see hands-free, share what you see live, obtain directions, send messages, and ask whatever is on your mind, end quote. With a series of Google and third-party applications, Google Glass promised to be a technology that would allow the wearer to scan images and people in the user's line of sight and Google them, using the massive data power of the Google search engine and to provide more information to the wearer about the objects and people captured in the Google Glass gaze. Google marketed it as a tool of freedom with a powerful video depicting a series of experiences that can be captured hands-free to foster a greater sense of participation and power over one's informational and geospatial environment than one can have holding a smartphone. But what is Google Glass, and why does it engender such emotion among those who both love and hate the technology? I'm going to talk for a few minutes now about this platform and some of its failures, and I'm going to also today talk across a few of Google's failures. And part of the reason that I study Google and have written about them extensively, I wrote a lot about Google Glass with one of my colleagues, Sarah Roberts, who's also now at UCLA, because Google is the information monopoly from our vantage point when we think about public engagement with information. And so it's very important, I think, to study the monopoly leader, mostly because everyone else is trying to copy what Google is doing in many cases, including, in some unfortunate cases, the library too. And so we'll get to that. One of the things that I think that's important to think about with Google Glass is that it also functions as a tool for occupying, commodifying, and profiting from the biological, psychological, and emotional data of its wearers, and pretty much from all of those who fall within its gaze. So I'm going to offer up Glass as one of a few case studies this afternoon that we can learn through from its first round of failure, and also look at search, which is really the primary focus of a lot of my research. And any of you that know or are familiar, like the one person who's ever heard of me before today, knows that I write about Google search. So we'll talk about that today too. All right, so let's talk about the Google Glass metaphor. Google Glass arrived at a time when Google, headquartered in Mountain View, California, had already incited people feeling the economic and emotional ramifications of the changing landscape of the San Francisco Bay Area, as the latest tech boom has pushed people out of affordable housing via evictions. Landlords across California, but particularly in San Francisco, have taken great advantage of the Ellis Act during the most recent techno boom in housing, allowing them to clear all tenants out of their multiple unit dwellings, often rent controlled, by claiming that the landlord is going out of business. This disposition maps onto the current processes of radical gentrification and displacement in many San Francisco neighborhoods. And it signals that power, whiteness, and class elitism are core values in the Google Glass design imaginary. Glass's recognizable aesthetic and outward-facing camera has elicited intense emotional response, particularly when exploration has taken place in areas of San Francisco occupied by residents who were finding themselves priced out or evicted from their homes to make way for the techno elite. This strategy is typically used to convert apartment buildings into high-priced condominiums. In other cases, landlords cleared out buildings multiple times under the guise of going out of business to perpetually increase rents. These practices have made new and existing housing unaffordable for those residents not employed in high-paying sectors such as the tech industries or finance. Indeed, Newsweek reported that in 2005, after new technology companies like Google began attracting thousands of high-paid employees to the Bay, the number of Ellis evictions tripled. In 2013, Ellis evictions grew 175% from the year before. Google in particular has received special ire not only because of perceptions of its presence being responsible for Ellis evictions, but also because its ubiquitous fleet of luxury buses and their impact on life in the Bay Area has been highly problematic. These coaches move San Franciscans who labor at its Mountain View corporate headquarters to and fro every day in private Wi-Fi enabled air-conditioned comfort, which I know people in Texas would actually prefer a little bit of air-conditioned comfort, so I don't take that lightly. According to the master's thesis of city planner Alexandra Goldman, rents at apartments near Google bus stops rose 20% during a period where the average rent increase was only 5%. Included in our evidence were Craigslist ads
Please
denoting the
wait for a
presence of the Google
participant
bus
to join
stops
the
as a
meeting.
perk for apartments located nearby. Apple, eBay, Twitter, Electronic Arts, Facebook, and Yahoo, among others, also run private bus lines, which have been protested by local residents. Indeed, Google and many high-tech companies in Silicon Valley have directly contributed to gentrification in previously multiracial neighborhoods in the San Francisco Bay Area. A challenge of gentrification is that it brings new wine bars, vape shops, restaurants, and boutiques to areas that might previously not have had such high-end amenities. But gentrification has always been a narrative of improvement that draws upon the mystique of transforming previously uninhabitable places into spaces that can be occupied. Like colonial projects of the past that seek an expansion into new territories and locales, despite there already being inhabitants of those spaces, gentrification is hailed as offering an improvement or reinvestment into neighborhoods that, when occupied by low-income people of color, were seen as not valuable or necessarily productive. As San Francisco is overrun with tech workers, the majority of whom are white and Asian men with lucrative salaries and stock options, the city is experiencing hyper-gentrification, a term coined by policy analysts who watch the millionaires produced at local tech giant Twitter buy up all the middle-income housing, displacing urban residents. And while the private coach services do offer reduced greenhouse gas emissions versus all 4,500 riders taking private vehicles, they have also monopolized local public transit bus stops in the Muni system, initially without remuneration to the city, which Goldman has documented. And these are part of a series of other notorious soft benefits at Google that appear egregious to those who do not work in similar tech industry settings. In short, the Google bus and the Google employees it ferries back and forth to Silicon Valley have become highly visible symbols of class division in San Francisco. In response, locals have gone so far as to block buses from moving or stopping for pickups and smashing bus windows. So here's a picture. This is a familiar kind of colonial narrative, right, or visual that that we might think of when we think about kind of occupation and colonization. Here's public residents in San Francisco. These are neighbors. These aren't municipal workers. These are just people who live in the neighborhood who have basically tried to shut down these tech buses from being able to take over the public infrastructure. Right? And so this is kind of important. The dominant narrative of Google Glass, I think, as events through its marketing strategy, has posited its wearers as explorers, which is a familiar colonial narrative, while at the same time, it's kind of completely unconscious of this project that it's also engaged in more materially with its employees in the city. And I think this is something that we've written about as kind of part of the imaginary of Google, in that it is a project, a company, and its products and services are about improvement, right? Without maybe thinking about some of the intended or unintended consequences. Now, utopian discourses of freedom through technology are not new. Critical geography scholars have written extensively about how hierarchies of power are reproduced and enacted through digital technologies. And they point to the ways in which informationalization and digitization of everyday life heightens control and surveillance, but also establishes digital enclosures with power-laden boundaries across race, gender, and class. Technological projects are never neutral, and Google Glass is not a tool of freedom despite its marketing discourse. Indeed, the most controversial aspect of Google Glass has been this outward-facing camera, allowing users to record things within their field of vision, which the camera then follows. Concerns have ranged from the potential theft of ATM passcodes by passers-by wearing glass, to the illegal infringements of glass wearers recording copyrighted material in movie theaters, or the potential for cheating in Las Vegas casinos, which have banned wearers. I do think that was actually a fun, smart idea. I mean, you can't deny that glass in a casino is pretty smart. Video resulting from all of these potential uses of technology could easily be uploaded real time or streamed to the internet to be circulated, stored, and owned by glass wearers, all without the consent of anyone within the gaze of Google Glass. Consistently, critics and news reports have largely leveled critiques at the product as an important site of the fight to resist hyper-surveillance and to help deepen our thinking about privacy. These tensions and negative emotions reflect the growing distrust between the discourses of Google as a company for everyday people, providing seemingly free services that improve the quality of our lives while asking for nothing in return. Jay McGregor, writing for Forbes.com, said, quote, "Google has suffered an image problem since it was accused of providing a backdoor to the National Security Administration in Snowden's documents. The real-life contradictions, like selling out the public to the NSA or gentrifying low-income neighborhoods of color, are where the imaginary of Google's utopia and benevolence are made most apparent. Google Glass occupies a similarly visible and elitist cultural space, made available only through a limited beta program afforded to the wealthy and connected. While other Google products, functions of data mining and usage tracking are undertaken on an individual user basis. So, for example, you might have Gmail, and Gmail, the data mining relationship is between you and Gmail, right? It's not extended beyond you and Gmail unless someone has access to your account. Unlike that, Google Glass is the visible manifestation of Google's tracking turned outward toward others, just as Google buses are the outward demonstration of neighborhood occupation and urban colonization. In a rapidly gentrifying and increasingly economically stratified San Francisco, people have reacted with anger and insecurity when finding themselves the unwilling targets of Google Glass's gaze. In this context, the glass wearers have been received in San Francisco and cities like it not only as glass holes, but Sarah and I argue also as class holes. We had to. You guys, it was too easy. Here's a campaign you can see from Stop the Cyborgs, where you can go to their site and print this placard, and restaurants and bars and people, especially in Seattle and the Bay Area, were downloading this and putting it up in their establishments, banning Google Glass from their establishments. So here's an example, kind of at the hardware level. I'll tell you, most of the people that I engage with, wanted Google Glass, right? They thought it was so cool and so amazing, and maybe hadn't quite problematized the context within which both tech companies are working. Sarah and I are now, from our work around Google Glass, we're also writing a book right now about Silicon Beach because we live in LA. And thinking about the kind of the southward expansion of Silicon Valley to LA, which is also undergoing the same kinds of gentrification from the expansion of the tech sector in Los Angeles. And it's a terrible time to be a faculty member in LA, because now that the tech sector is really booming, we're all working poor and actually can't afford to buy houses. So that's a bummer. All right. So let's talk about now a different case, and this is the case of searching for ourselves. And this is a place where I've spent a lot of time also thinking about Google search. On October 21st, 2013, the United Nations launched a campaign directed by Mimak Ogilvy and Mather Dubai using genuine Google searches to bring critical attention to the sexist and discriminatory ways in which women are regarded and denied human rights. Over the mouths of various women of color were the auto-suggestions that were reflected by as the most popular searches that take place in Google. So what the campaign designers did is they started typing a couple of words, and then they looked to see what Google auto-suggest filled. And what they found is that when they started women cannot, they got women cannot drive, be bishops, be trusted, speak in church. Women shouldn't have rights, vote, work, box. Women should stay at home, be slaves, be in the kitchen, not speak in church. Women need to be put in their places, know their place, be controlled, be disciplined. Christopher Hunt, the art director of the campaign, said, quote, "When we came across these searches, we were shocked by how negative they were and decided we had to do something with them," end quote. What the campaign determined to show was how the ads are shocking because they show just how far we still have to go to achieve gender equality. That was the position of the campaign. Kareem Shuhibar, a copywriter for the campaign who was quoted on the United Nations website, said, "They are a wake-up call, and we hope that the message will travel far." Now, the campaign, when I saw it, I felt that it was reflective of our common understanding and beliefs about search engine results. And this is what the public generally believes around search engine results, which is that they credibly reflect the realities and truths about how search search engine users feel. And in many ways, this campaign kind of encapsulates the way the public generally thinks of search, that it is typically and almost solely a reflection of simply what is most popular. But in my forthcoming book, Algorithms of Oppression, which someone asked me, could we have algorithms of hope once? And I was like, I don't know, you guys got to work on that, because I don't know. Maybe that'll be like in 10 years from now, we'll write that book. What I talk about in that book is the ways in which myself and other LIS researchers and practitioners and information communication scholars are thinking about the critical power issues that need to be addressed in search. Now, I'm particularly concerned with the implications of search because it's constantly evolving and shifting over time, and it really now occupies the most meaningful engagements with the web and information seeking. I often try to teach my students that if they're looking for something on the web and they don't know where it is, they don't have the URL, they have to use some type of information broker. That broker or guide is a search engine, which is so wholly normalized now for them that they just take it for granted. It doesn't even occur to them that there's something that decisions are being made within the context of a search engine to lead them to particular things or to preclude other things. So let me give you some examples of some of the failures. One of the things that I think we need to be thoughtful about is that we might find ourselves feeling collectively helpless to the market forces of hypercapitalism that are driving us to faster and deeper investments in digital technologies and big data paradigms. But really what we might need are slower, more nuanced and critical approaches to information. And I think this is a place where I always love talking to people who are librarians and information professionals, not only because it's been my field for many years now, but also because I think that we have a more nuanced way of thinking about information and access to information. And one of the things that I'm going to implore you to be thinking about as I'm talking is, what would it look like if our field indexed the web? I mean, those are the kinds of things that I'm trying to work on in my own research, is thinking about what public interest search looks like out of this kind of commercial advertising-driven paradigm. I used to work in advertising for many years before I became an academic, and sometimes people like to compliment me by telling me that they could tell that I used to be in marketing by the way that I speak. I don't know, you guys, it's just how it is. I'm not able to kind of get some of that pace out of my voice, but I will say that when I was in advertising, I always thought of Google as an advertising partner. We engaged with it as a key ingredient to our clients' success. And so it was fascinating to go to information school at Illinois when I went years ago, and to find people engaging with Google as if it were the next public library. And as if it was, the solution. And I was like, wait, what? That's not what's happening there. Because I had just left, an agency where we paid a lot of money to gamify the algorithms on behalf of our clients. And so these are the things that I think that we really understand and that we should be thinking about in our own work as we go forward. So let me give you some examples of what happens when the gamified algorithm actually stands as the proxy for good public information. Here's an example. This is a story that went viral last year or so. DeRay McKesson, who is kind of a well-known social media personality on Twitter in particular, he became very popular overnight when Beyonce followed him. So I know some of you are from Houston. I was talking to John earlier. If you could get Beyonce to follow me, it would really amplify my work. And I will share and I will amplify your work through it. Okay, so DeRay tweeted out, if you Google map the N-word house, this is what you'll find: America. And the Washington Post quickly picked this story up. And what was happening is that if you went into Google Maps and you did a search on the N-word house or the N-word king, you would be taken to the White House. All right, so Google the Washington Post followed up and interviewed Google, and a Google exec says some inappropriate results are surfacing in Google Maps. It should not be. We apologize for any offense this may have caused. When my husband's like, I'm sorry if you're offended, I never really fully feel apologized to. So he doesn't do that. A Google spokesperson told US News in an email, our teams are working to fix this issue quickly. Now, this is these stories of glitches found in systems do not suggest that the organizing logics of the web could be broken, but rather that there are these occasional one-off moments where something goes terribly wrong with otherwise near perfect functioning systems. And there are many, many examples of kind of the problematics of these systems that enough, I think, that I could write a book and try to demonstrate that we have enough evidence to show that the systems are not working near perfectly. They might be working near perfectly on behalf of some, but certainly not for many others. I think that with the exception of a handful of scholars and journalists who are kind of catching these egregious acts, very few people are taking notice. And I think we need to take greater notice of what's offered by these algorithms. Because the fact that we have artificial intelligence kind of making decisions for us, sometimes I talk about the ways in which we've abdicated our own human decision making to algorithms, and which of course algorithms are the product of human decision making, right? People write code, they write mathematical formulations that represent particular types of complex phenomena or concepts, but they're of course laden with values because they're written by people, and yet somehow the public is increasingly being acculturated, and when I say somehow, I say that with a wink because we know how. The public is being acculturated to artificial intelligence as a proxy for better thinking than human beings, than they themselves might be able to make, or that other people might be able to make, or that a reference librarian might be able to make, or that a teacher might be able to make. Here's another example. Jessica Gwynn wrote about this for USA Today. She's a great tech reporter. If you're interested in kind of following reporters who are doing the kind of critical investigation around tech, the tech sector, definitely follow her work. Here's Kabir Ali. His friend is taking a video of him. Some of you might have caught this. This was another story that went viral last year. He says, he's searching, he says, let's see what happens when you search for 3 white teenagers. And when you search for 3 white teenagers, first he says, let's see what happens when you look for 3 black teenagers. So 3 black teenagers brings mugshots exclusively up on his phone. And he says, okay, now let's see what happens when you change one word. Let's go from black to white. So he goes from 3 black teenagers, which is all mugshots for the most part of African Americans, to 3 white teenagers, which is kind of like Getty stock photography of all American white kids who are playing multiple sports at one time. And I don't get the basketball. Okay, so here's a story that goes viral, right? And quietly, in this case, Google didn't really respond with a public statement. It just tweaked the algorithm. And the next day, someone on Twitter goes back and is replicating, and then they find that Google's inserted a criminal proceeding of a white teen into the 3 white teenagers, and has also inserted some new pictures for 3 black teenagers. All right. Here's another story. I mean, you might already be familiar with all these, but I just kind of pulled them together in one place. Here's Google searches on unprofessional hairstyles for work. So unprofessional hairstyles for work, the story goes viral, all black women wearing natural hair. So I wore my unprofessional hairstyle for you today, which is also the hairstyle I wear every day. Then when you search for professional hairstyles, you get exclusively white women with updos or hair pulled back. So this is also a cautionary tale for white women, that it's the updo that makes you, or the pony, that makes you professional. Don't forget that. All right, so here's an example, right, of the ways in which, you know, these kind of racialized conceptions around ideas get concretized in search engines. And you can imagine, think about young people using image search, which I'm telling you because I talk to teachers all the time, their teachers are constantly sending them to just Google it, right? And of course, these representations might go completely unexamined. These might be happening with people in a ubiquitous 24/7 environment where no one's there to unpack it and make sense of it. Now, here's the work that I originally started, and this is what led me kind of on this path. In 2009, I was conducting searches on Black girls. I was searching for a lot of different kind of intersectional identities of Black women and girls, Asian women and girls, Latina women and girls. In 2009, the first search for Black girls, and this is with Google's default settings, was hotblackpussy.com. I told you guys this is a talk that needs a cocktail afterwards because I'm going to say pussy a few times right now. All right, and then we're going to get past this slide. All right, so by 2011, they're out of business. Sugary Black pussy comes to the fore as the #1 representation. Now imagine you're a Black girl looking for information. What are other Black girls up to? And we know that when people are keyword searching in Google, they're using a minimal amount of words unless they're a programmer that's like putting in a string of code looking for an error. In this case, by 2011, we have a porn site followed by the Black Girls, which is a UK band of white guys who call themselves the Black Girls. Has anyone here? No one's ever. It's like in my whole life that I've been talking about this work, 3 people have ever heard of the Black Girls. Incredible at search engine optimization, terrible at music distribution. So I don't know. I feel like I've probably promoted them more than anyone else has. All right. Followed by a porn site, followed by a porn site, followed by like a gateway chat site that goes to porn, followed by the Black Girls Are Banned, their Facebook page, they're winning, and then another porn site and a blog. All right, so I first wrote about this for Bitch Magazine. I wanted to write about it for Essence Magazine, which is a magazine that kind of focuses on Black women and women of color, because I thought it would be a great critical media literacy kind of moment that I could get out. Black women could be talking with their daughters in particular and their sons, because I'm sure sons are also looking for Black girls. And we could kind of, do some thinking, but you have to be somebody to get to write for Essence, and I wasn't, and am not yet. So I wrote for Bitch Magazine. Bitch Magazine is a magazine, it's a feminist pop culture critique magazine. I was like, this is a win. There's no way they're not gonna let me write. I wrote them. They were doing a special issue on cyberspace, and it was too late to tell them that we weren't releasing cyberspace anymore. So I was just like, could you just let me write this story? And they said, no, everybody knows when you search for girls that you get porn. And I was like, no, this is me on email. No, that's not true. Also, don't we want to critique that? We're just going to let that stand? And they were like, it's not a story. And so then, because I was in advertising, I'm kind of relentless. I know what I'm doing. So I wrote back the key email, and I said, I'd like you to do a search for women's magazines and let me know if Bitch Magazine comes back in the first 5 pages. Also, don't forget, people don't go past the first page. And then they were like, okay, you can write your story. So that's how I got into Bitch Magazine, and I love them. They gave me kind of the first platform. A lot of undergraduates read this article, and part of what I talk about in that is these ways in which, for example, if you're looking for feminist media, if you don't know to use the word feminist, feminism has been completely divorced from women's media. All right, you look up women's magazines, you are not going to get feminist magazines. So what does it mean that the algorithm has divorced feminism from women and women's media, all right? And so these are the kinds of things that I talk about in that article, and then I wrote a piece, and all of this has been kind of, that was the genesis for the book. The misrepresentations of Asian and Latina girls, similar, porn site, sexualized images, porn site, dating site that goes, in that direction. Why Asian girls go for white guys, that must be super popular. I'm not sure how but that's been gamed in. And Asian girls aren't shy, porn site. All the ads Now, this is another thing. I don't have a lot of time today to talk about this, but again, it's always important. The position is that this line is the old school line between editorial and advertising that we used to have in newspapers and mass media. That thin line that you can barely see. I mean, it's almost like it's hilarious, actually. I mean, it is a thin line, because the idea here is that Google is trying to match advertising with the keywords that you're using. So this idea that these are somehow organic search results that have nothing to do with the ads is, I'm going to say, is like untrue. So similar with Latinas, mostly, Match. First, you have Match as a site that's not even yellow boxed, right? So it's not even calling out that this is a paid ad. Hot Latinas on Facebook, Hot Latinas on Pinterest, Latina girl twerking, 50 hottest Latinas, okay, and another sex site. So, yet this is the interface of the search engine that we are accustomed to before we get there, right? This interface of the search engine as a mechanism for accessing the internet is not immune. It's not impartial to the concerns of embedded value systems. And this is what I argue about. The reason why I talk about algorithms of oppression is because I'm trying to demonstrate the ways in which racist and sexist bias get encoded in a way that is invisible to the users. In fact, interfaces like this deny the possibility of a visible classification system and acculturate the public to the notion that knowledge is both easily accessible and instantly available, even knowledge that is still highly contested. And I know everyone in this room understands this because you work with people who are seeking information. And so what does it mean when, even if you go to a library database, I would argue, but certainly in the space of a commercial search engine, that you can just simply ask a question and get an answer, even though there are questions that still cannot be answered, even though there are epistemologies that are in conflict. The entire university is a place where we have multiple competing ideas, disciplines that are sometimes in conflict, sometimes are complementary, that are nuanced, that cannot be answered in 0.003 seconds. And yet we have an acculturation that's happening in our information space, and I think that this is really important. The classification of information in search engines is more than the specific mathematical algorithms and deep machine learning developed by computer scientists and software engineers to index upwards of 1 trillion pages of information and move it from the universal data pile to the first page of results on a computer screen. The interface on the screen presents an information reality, while the operations are rendered increasingly invisible. There's great scholarship that you can read. Alex Galloway really is someone who kind of destabilizes the idea of digital technologies as transparent, benign windows or doors providing a new path to somewhere that are insignificant. In fact, he argues that the digital interface is a material reality structuring a discourse embedded with historical relations, working often under the auspices of ludic capitalism, where a kind of playful engagement of labor is masked in vital digital media platforms like Google. And so let me go on and give you a couple of other issues. Now, recently, this story was picked up kind of online that white nationalists may be manipulating Google's search results. There's a great report that just came out. I want to say Alice Marwick at Data and Society just announced a new study on white nationalists and white supremacists and their incredibly organized community. I mean, you guys, the white nationalists, they're beating us. They're more organized than us, even with ALA. I mean, we have big conferences, but they're more organized when it comes to the web. And what they've been able to do is really also gamify and manipulate search results. And you see this often, right? So here you have kind of a response from Google about adjusting the algorithm to prevent these racist results from coming up to the top. And he says, Sergey Brin says, that's bad technology practice, except that the bad technology practice is their algorithm that allows that to happen in the first place. right? So there's again, this idea that he says an important part of our values as a company is that we don't edit the search results. What our algorithms produce, whether we like it or not, are the search results. That always makes me laugh inside. I think people want to know we have unbiased search results. Okay, except that in Germany and France, where it's illegal to traffic in anti-Semitism and Nazi paraphernalia, Google by law complies and erases and pushes all of the anti-Semitism and Nazi imagery and material down, out of sight, takes it out. And people have written about this. And so this idea, again, is disingenuous, that there's no way that we have control over the algorithm that we make, first of all, and that the search results are, in fact, unbiased. We know better. Here's Google's Not Just Another Platform, a great story by The Guardian. Germany now taking action, right, taking Google to court around this kind of these dynamics of their allowing these types of anti-Semitic and problematic results to persist. Now, let's go beyond the representation. Now let's start talking about meaning, and this is this is the last case I'm going to give you. And I wrote a whole chapter about Dylann Roof right after the murders in South Carolina. So this is for the one person in the room who doesn't know that on the evening of June 17th in 2015 in Charleston, South Carolina, a 21-year-old white nationalist, Dylann Storm Roof, opened fire on an unsuspecting African-American group of Christian worshipers at Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in one of the most heinous racial and religious hate crimes of recent memory. The location of the murders was not chosen in vain by Roof. It stood as one of the oldest symbols of African-American freedom in the United States. Emanuel AME was organized by free and enslaved Black and African people in 1791, where its membership grew into the thousands, only to be burned down in 1822 by white South Carolinians who had heard that church member Denmark Vesey was leading an effort to organize enslaved Blacks to revolt against their slave masters. For over 200 years, the Emanuel AME Church has been a site and symbol of the struggle for freedom from white supremacy and a place where organizing for civil and human rights and full participation of Black people has been foregrounded by its members and supporters from across the country. So right after the murder, many of us were, paralyzed, searching, trying to make sense of what had just happened. And within about 24 hours, someone on Twitter had found Dylann Roof's manifesto or his online diary, which the FBI later authenticated. And so many of us were poring over that, myself included, and I started writing. This is the portion of his manifesto that really jumped out at me, though. He says, the event that truly awakened me was the Trayvon Martin case. I kept hearing and seeing his name, and eventually I decided to look him up. I read the Wikipedia article, and right away I was unable to understand what the big deal was. It was obvious that Zimmerman was in the right. But more importantly, this prompted me to type in the words black on white crime into Google, and I have never been the same since that day. The first website I came to was the Council of Conservative Citizens. There were pages upon pages of these brutal black on white murders. I was in disbelief. At this moment, I realized that something was very wrong. How could the news be blowing up the Trayvon Martin case while hundreds of these black on white murders got ignored? From this point, I researched deeper and found out what was happening in Europe. I saw that the same things were happening in England and France and in all the other Western European countries. Again, I found myself in disbelief. As an American, we are taught to accept living in the melting pot, and Black and other minorities have just as much right to be here as we do, since we are all immigrants. Not exactly. But Europe is the homeland of white people, and in many ways, the situation is even worse there. From here, I found out about the Jewish problem and other issues facing our race, and I can say today that I am completely racially aware. Now, according to the manifesto reported on in the news, Dylann Roof allegedly typed black on white crime in a Google search box to make sense of the news reporting on Trayvon Martin, a young African-American teenager who was killed and whose killer, George Zimmerman, was acquitted of murder. What Roof found was information that confirmed a patently false notion that black violence on white Americans is an American crisis. What's compelling about the alleged information Roof found to make sense of his emerging racial attitude is how his search terms did not lead him to FBI crime statistics about violence in the United States, which point to how crime against white Americans is largely an intra-racial phenomenon. Most violence against white Americans is committed by white Americans, as is most violence against African Americans, largely committed by other African Americans. Violent crime is largely a matter of perpetration by proximity to those who are demographically similar to the victim. So you heard it here today that although I know everyone is familiar with the phrase black on black crime, we need to add white on white crime to our vocabularies. You guys are too serious for me. All right. But really, you should. Okay. I mean, it allows you to problematize the phrase black on black crime. This is what I'm trying to get at for you. Homicides across racial lines do not nearly happen in the ways white supremacist organizations purport. A search on the phrase black on white crimes does not lead to any experts on race, nor to any universities, libraries, or books about articles about the history of race in the United States. It does not point to any information to dispel the stereotype purported by white supremacist organizations. This is where I think it's critical that we think about the implications of people who are attempting to vet information in the news media about race and race relations and who are led to fascist, conservative, anti-black, anti-Jewish, misogynist, and other white supremacist websites. The power of search engines to lead people to a breadth and depth of information cannot be more powerfully illustrated to me than by looking at Dylann Roof's own alleged words about using Google to find information about the Trayvon Martin murder. And this is where I feel very strongly that our work has been so focused on indexing and classifying scholarly information and other types of information, but we cannot afford any longer to leave the open web up for grabs. And so I've been trying very hard. I tried to convince IMLS to give me money so that I could get a bunch of librarians together and professionals, people even in this room, to work on this. And this is where I know you're recording me, so I might really just be screwing myself badly. But I'm gonna tell you that all of the IMLS reviewers to the idea of librarians indexing the web, every single one of them wrote back to me and said, this is not a thing. Librarians don't have any issues with Google, and there's nothing wrong with Google. They didn't even Google me. Do you know what I'm saying? To like figure out what I'd been talking about. So, okay, all right. So that's anybody who's got some connections to IMLS, let's fix that too. All right, you got two projects, Beyonce and IMLS. I feel like the IMLS one might be harder. Okay, so now let's turn to our own database. Here's the UCLA library, all right? So let's imagine that Dylann Roof or someone else like him had gone to, wow, this is small, all right, had gone to the UCLA library database and done a search for black on white crime, all right? And I have to say that the Council of Conservative Citizens, which is what Dylann Roof found. You know, it's like the online version of the White Citizens Council, right? So if you can't be in the Klan because you're the mayor or you're a city council person or you're a senator or a Congress member, then you join the White Citizens Council or the Council on Conservative Citizens type of organization if you are interested in kind of cloaking your white supremacy. Jesse Daniels wrote an amazing book called Cyber Racism that's about these cloaked websites that kind of pretend to be one thing, but are in fact just a front for something else. So here, when I did my search on black on white crime, what I get is books that aren't about black on white or no relationship between black and white in the keywords here on the kind of front half of the page. But then the first hit that has both black and white as keywords is America and Black and White, One Nation Indivisible. Now, America and Black and White, One Nation Indivisible by Stephen Thernstrom and Abigail Thernstrom, who are both Harvard professors, is troubling because both of these professors work for the Manhattan Institute, a right-wing policy think tank monitored by the Center for Media and Democracy, which is a national watchdog group that conducts in-depth investigations into corruption and the undue influence of corporations on media and democracy. That's how they self-describe. The Manhattan Institute is one of these kind of think tanks that has been highly responsible for buttressing anti-people of color, anti-poor people, books and literature under the guise of kind of like an academic cloak framework, right? So here we have some poor cataloger who didn't know. And this is one of the reasons I give this example to my students, because this is why catalogers and people who work around classification also have to be engaging in work around their own education and professional development around race and gender in particular, because it's real difficult to parse what this book is. But here's the first book about race in black and white race relations. And of course, there are so many incredible books that we could, in fact, be looking to. And I think that if one does not have a requisite training in our program at UCLA, we have one class, I teach it, I know that's a surprise to you, that deals with race and gender and sexuality, because all those apparently can be covered in 10 weeks. And then the rest of the curriculum is whatever the rest of the curriculum is. I don't know. I don't teach that. And so I think this is, again, we have to even think about at the base level LIS curriculum and training. How many of you took courses in your LIS program or training at any point specifically around kind of critical race and gender? 1, 2, 3, 4. I counted you twice, 3. Okay. So this is, again, how would we have the understanding to make sense of what we're doing? And of course, what are the consequences of that? I like to say that we have more data and technology than ever, and we have more inequality and injustice to go with it. So this really is the end for me. One of the other things I would like you to think about on your wine break is the ways in which our quest and our kind of thirst for the digital, particularly in our field, kind of what some of its broader implications. So now I'm going to take us back to think about the hardware project of the Google Glass Imaginary, and now think about some of the implications. So this is the last kind of little thing I want to say, and then I'm going to give you some ideas, things we can act upon. I co-edited a book with my colleague Brindisha Tynes from USC called The Intersectional Internet, and in it we kind of try to take up intersectionality, which is a Black feminist keyword, to think about the internet. And part of what we're trying to investigate here is the expansion of the commercial sector, which is often buttressed by overinvestment in digital technologies, which ultimately serve as a site of profit and uneven labor distribution throughout the networked economy. And one of the things that I'm working on kind of moving forward after this is looking at the material, again, the material realities of what happens when we're invested in the digital. You know, we're in this beautiful room in this beautiful building with more screens than I've actually ever had backing me up. And, you know, it's beautiful and we enjoy it and we're acculturated to enjoying it. But one of the things that we don't understand is kind of the raw minerals and the labor that go into making all of our electronics and our electronic kind of and digital infrastructure. And so I've been looking and starting to write about some dimensions of this labor force and this infrastructure, which includes child and forced laborers in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo who are mining ore. Coltan, which is a key mineral that's needed to make microprocessor chips. And of course, companies like Nokia, Intel, Sony, and Ericsson are all in need of such minerals. Google also just went into the microprocessor chip business because all of them need this for hardware like phones and computers. So I think we need to also be thinking about, while we're thinking about our open data and we're thinking about our kind of open projects, we also need to be thinking about the global world that's implicated in our projects. All right, maybe we don't have to upgrade our technology every couple of years. Maybe we can think about sustainable design that doesn't, I tell my engineering students when they take classes with me, can you imagine the poor engineering students taking class with me? But they're into it, it's cool, they're not mad. But I say to them, you know, design this so that no one dies. That's a design challenge. Don't tell me about the new font that I can't read. Apple. It's fine. It's cool. So those are the kinds of challenges that I think in an increasingly shrinking world where we have climate disaster, we have refugee crises that are tied to environmental catastrophes. We are all implicated in this. This is our own Earth. This is the only Earth we have. And so it's imperative, I think, that we start thinking about how we're tied to this broader global economy. Communications scholar Robert Mejia really critiqued in the book the multiple ways in which electronics and communications devices and infrastructures have material consequences and the potency of their environmental impact. He notes that it's imperative that media and cultural studies scholars offer an account of how the 3.7 million gallons of water used per day by Intel in Hillsboro, Oregon, and the millions more used elsewhere contribute to an ecology hospitable to infectious disease and its natural reservoirs. Knowing that an estimated 632,000 pounds of mercury were disposed of in the United States landfills between 1997 and 2007 from just discarded personal computers alone, and that about 130 million cell phones are also thrown away each year. All right, so he's arguing, as we are trying to do in some of this work, this new work, to try to put these things on your radar so that as you build these systems, that these kinds of considerations be taken into account. Here's the thing this is my last slide. Here's some of the ways I think we can intervene upon these failures. First, I think we have to reject the notions of neutrality in our field, in our practice, as if the work that we're doing is not political. Or the technologies that we're adopting don't have political consequences, because that is just a misnomer. It's not true. And even still, we have to undo that thinking for people who come into information school. And help them understand the incredibly political nature of this field. So if you picked librarianship or information work because you wanted to be a broker, I don't know, you wanted to be a living Google search engine, as if your own biases aren't present, right? Or your lack of knowledge about particular things isn't present, then let that go, all right? And let's take ownership and responsibility for what we can know and how we can intervene. I think also, trying to embrace these critical perspectives on information and technology is really important, and I'm very grateful that you've given me a chance to talk to you today. That signals to me either that you didn't really know anything about who I was and you screwed yourselves, or that you wanted to hear these kinds of perspectives as just kind of a provocation for some of the work that you're working on. I think we also need to pay attention to commercially biased information, including the platforms that we adopt, and why not go back to kind of making some of our own things with some of the conscientious practice. Resisting these black box technologies, if we can't see under the hood of the algorithms of the kind of databases and technologies that we're using, maybe we should consider another way. Eliminating the technology overdevelopment and e-waste. Are there things that we could think through, those of you that are kind of responsible for that? Making technology design visible and intervenable, I think, is so important, especially when we're working with people who are using information, which I like to say rather than users. Because for me, growing up, if you were like a user, that just was a bad thing. So it's weird to go to information school and people are users. How about users of information or people who use information? And then I think ultimately our project is about championing credible information for democracy. I've given this talk for some time, and when I gave it before the presidential election outcome, nobody cared, but now everybody cares. So thanks, Trump. I don't know. That's not like I didn't need that boost, right, for us to talk about the kinds of credible information that we need. But I think that our community, our field, has such a crucial role to play because we're invested in different kinds of possibilities for the future. And so, thank you so much for listening to me today. Are we out of time? I try to time it so no one can ask me questions. That's not really true. That's not true.
We can do like one or two questions.
One or two questions. Make it good, because you're representing the whole crowd now. It's a lot of pressure.
This conference was like mostly librarians. I'm a researcher for a private company.
Awesome.
So I'm not a representative sample here. So, did you hear several months ago about Microsoft making this artificial intelligence bot
Yes.
that it put on Twitter? And it took less than a day for it to turn into a racist, misogynist Nazi. So everybody was up in arms and asking for an apology from Microsoft like it was Microsoft's problem. But really what the algorithm did, it did exactly what they wanted it to. It said, hey, here's a brain, go become a human. Humans will teach you what a human is. And so basically I'm asking, like, I know technology can be used for evil and is frequently, but are we looking at the wrong problem here? Is it the algorithm or is it us?
Well, listen, it's a good question, but then I think it forecloses the possibility that these technologies are implicated in many decisions for us that we cannot intervene upon. And so, while on one hand, so like your credit score or your banking, or whether you're redlined for a loan or not. I mean, a lot of these things. Kathy O'Neill just wrote this great book, Weapons of Math Destruction, and where she talks about the ways that big data practices are virtually making decisions that human beings otherwise would have or could have made in the flesh, like fleshy human beings, not algorithmic human beings. So for me, I think it's insufficient to say we have to stop people from thinking in racist and sexist ways in order to have the technology design work out, because we've been working for a few hundred years in this country, kind of like since the beginning of it, to resist racism, xenophobia, occupation, colonization. And, if we have to end that or get that all worked out before the technology will be right, I'm not sure I can follow the logic of it, that's going to be the way. I think people have to, of course, we want a society where people aren't racist and sexist and homophobic. But if a machine is being encoded with those values, and then the machine is being posited as neutral and objective, because at least if a person is this way, right, in making decisions for us, we can take it up with their supervisor, we can file a lawsuit, we have lots of different mechanisms that we can kind of touch upon discrimination in the fleshy human experience. But we have a much harder time when it's encoded in technology and then considered big data, apolitical. And that's the part I'm more concerned about. So I take your question, to heart, because algorithms are trained by human beings. And when you crowdsource the training, you're going to get the worst. Partially not just because the people are terrible, which people are terrible, okay? But it's not just because people are terrible. It's because of what I showed you in Alice Marwick's new work, where some communities are extremely well organized online, like right-wing, fascist, white nationalists. They're really well organized, so they can pounce and they can train it first. We're not so organized, those of us who might want to offer a counter. So maybe that's also part of the intervention. Who gets to train the algorithm first? But ultimately, this is an issue of that some set of values is going to train the technology vis-a-vis people and machines. And I think we've got to pause and keep interrogating this, legislating around it, what have you. It's very difficult. It's difficult to prove that a computer discriminated against you. You know how hard it is to get proof that a human being discriminated against you? The Supreme Court says that I have to prove what was in your heart, not you, because I know you like me because you asked a question. But right, I would have to prove what was in your heart, what your intention was, regardless of the material outcome that I may have been discriminated against. Try applying that to a computer, if that's the legal framework too. So I guess that's where, that's my thoughts about that.
I just have a thing to add to that. So humans are influencing the algorithm, but then the people using the end product are influenced by that too. So it's like a self-perpetuating creation.
Yeah.
So like the person who searched up white on black crime, they were looking for an answer and they were given this influence when maybe they were actually looking for the real answer. I don't know about that particular person looking for the real answer or not. But people go to Google sometimes because they're looking for an actual answer, the actual answer. And if it's giving you trash that's just an algorithm that's biased or even an accidental bias, that's what they're taking away from that.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge is that if Google is going to be posited as the public information portal, which it is not, then we should be generating the public information portal. And I teach future librarians and information professionals, and it's not perfect. And and it's very hard, quite frankly, to try to dislodge some of these ideas. But of course, you're right. I mean, people are looking for information. Dylan Roof, in his own words, is like, and people who he went to high school with, they interviewed, and they were like, his black friends were like, what? Dylan is like shooting up a church? I mean, some of them were kind of not so sure about that because he had friends of color. And yet he goes in and there's no point counterpoint, or there's no point multiple counterpoints, right? Black on white crime doesn't signal like, hey, did you know that only a really narrow segment of white supremacists, or people who don't understand race use that phrase? Because that's actually true. So that wasn't available, and that's not how the system and the platform is designed anyway. Okay.
I think we're going to have to leave it there.
We're out of time. Thank you so much. It was nice to meet you. Appreciate you.